I still remember the first time I walked into that garage. It was a hot summer day, the kind where the air shimmers above the pavement and your shirt sticks to your back within minutes of stepping outside. My car had been making this strange, rattling noise for weeks, and after putting it off for far too long, I finally admitted defeat and decided to get it checked out. Little did I know that this routine car maintenance would lead to one of the most unexpected moments of my life. The garage was called Mike's Auto Repair, a nondescript building with faded red brick and large bay doors that were rolled up to let in whatever breeze might pass through. As I pulled in, the smell hit me immediately, that distinct mixture of motor oil, rubber, and metal that seems universal to all auto shops. There's something oddly comforting about it, though I couldn't tell you why. Maybe it's the association with problems being fixed, things being made right again. I'm not particularly knowledgeable about cars. In fact, I'm the type who barely remembers to check the oil and only learns the names of car parts when something goes wrong with them. This lack of automotive expertise always makes me feel slightly vulnerable when dealing with mechanics. There's always this worry in the back of my mind that my ignorance will somehow be used against me, that I'll end up paying for repairs I don't actually need because I wouldn't know any better. As I stepped out of my car, wiping my brow from the heat, I noticed the garage was busier than I expected for a Tuesday afternoon. 2 cars were already up on lifts, and I could see legs sticking out from beneath another vehicle. The sound of metal tools clanking against concrete and the occasional burst from an air compressor created a symphony of industrious activity. A radio was playing somewhere in the background, though the music was nearly drowned out by the mechanical cacophony. I stood there for a moment, unsure of where to go or who to talk to. That's when I first saw him. He emerged from behind my car, wiping his hands on a rag that might have been white once, but was now stained with various shades of automotive fluids. He was tall, taller than me by several inches, with broad shoulders that tapered down to a trim waist. His dark hair was slightly disheveled, and there was a smudge of something black across his forearm. "This yours?" he asked, nodding toward my car. His voice was deeper than I expected, with a slight roughness to it that matched his appearance perfectly. "Yeah," I replied, suddenly aware of how my voice sounded in comparison. "It's been making this weird noise. Kind of a rattling sound when I accelerate." He nodded thoughtfully, his eyes, a striking shade of hazel that I couldn't help but notice, focused on the car rather than me. "Let's take a look," he said, moving toward the driver's side. "I'm Alex, by the way." "Nice to meet you, Alex." "I'm Jamie," I responded, following him to the car. As he leaned in to turn on the ignition, I couldn't help but notice how his work uniform, a simple blue button-up with Alex embroidered on a patch, stretched across his back. There was something inherently attractive about someone who knew what they were doing, who moved with confidence and purpose. And Alex definitely had that quality in spades. He listened to the engine for a moment, his expression concentrated. I found myself watching his face, the way his brow furrowed slightly, the way his eyes narrowed in focus. It was strangely intimate, observing someone when they're completely absorbed in their work, unaware of being watched. "Give it some gas," he instructed, and I reached in awkwardly past him to press the accelerator. The rattling noise emerged immediately, a metallic sound that seemed to come from somewhere beneath the hood. "Hear that?" I asked, unnecessarily. Of course he heard it. That was the whole point. Alex nodded, a small smile playing at the corner of his mouth. "Yeah, I hear it. Sounds like it could be a loose heat shield or maybe something with the exhaust system. Let me get it up on a lift and take a better look." As he straightened up, he was suddenly much closer to me than I had anticipated. There was a moment, brief but undeniable, where our eyes met, and something passed between us. A recognition, perhaps, or maybe just my imagination working overtime. Either way, I felt a flutter of something in my chest that I hadn't expected. The garage itself was a fascinating place, full of tools I couldn't name and parts one wouldn't recognize. As Alex drove my car onto the lift, I took in my surroundings more carefully. There were 3 other mechanics working that day. An older man with gray hair and arms covered in faded tattoos was hunched over an engine, muttering to himself. A younger guy, probably in his early 20s, was talking to a customer, a middle-aged woman who looked about as comfortable in the garage as I felt. And then there was someone working beneath a truck, only their legs visible. The walls were lined with tool chests and shelves stacked with parts and fluids. Calendars featuring cars, not the pin-up models of yesteryear, thankfully, decorated what little wall space remained. It was organized chaos, a space that made perfect sense to those who worked there, but remained a mystery to outsiders like me. Alex gestured for me to follow him to a small waiting area, just a couple of chairs and a coffee table covered in dog-eared car magazines. "It'll be a little while," he explained. "Feel free to wait here, or there's a coffee shop down the street if you prefer." I considered my options. The coffee shop sounded appealing. Air conditioning and iced coffee were a tempting combination on such a hot day. But something made me want to stay. "I think I'll wait here, if that's okay," I said. "I'm curious about what's wrong with my car." Alex looked slightly surprised, but nodded. "Sure thing. Feel free to come take a look when I've got it up on the lift. Sometimes it helps to see the problem for yourself." That's how I found myself standing beside Alex as he worked on my car. He had raised it up on the hydraulic lift, and we were both looking at the underside of my vehicle. He pointed out various components, explaining what they did and how they connected to each other. I understood maybe half of what he was saying, but I enjoyed listening to him talk. There was passion in his voice, the kind that only comes when someone truly loves what they do. "See this here?" he asked, pointing to something that looked like every other metal part to my untrained eye. "This is your catalytic converter. And over here is your exhaust manifold." His hand moved, indicating different areas. "And I think I see your culprit." He reached up, his arm brushing against mine as he did so. Even in the heat of the garage, I noticed the contact, the brief warmth of his skin against mine. He was focused on the task at hand, but I found myself distracted by his proximity, by the scent of him, a mixture of soap and sweat, and that ever-present motor oil that seemed to permeate everything in the garage. "Yep, just as I thought," he said, seemingly unaware of my internal distraction. "You've got a loose heat shield. It's this thin metal piece that protects other components from the heat of the exhaust. When they get old, the welds can break and they start to rattle." I leaned in closer, genuinely trying to see what he was pointing at. "Is it serious?" I asked. Alex shook his head, a strand of dark hair falling across his forehead. "Nah, not serious. Annoying, but not dangerous. I can either reattach it or remove it completely. Removing it is quicker and cheaper, and honestly, on a car this age, it's probably the better option." "I trust your judgment," I said, and I meant it. Despite my usual wariness around mechanics, there was something about Alex that inspired confidence. Maybe it was the way he explained things without condescension, or maybe it was just those hazel eyes. Either way, I found myself relaxing around him in a way I hadn't expected. He nodded and began to work, his movements efficient and practiced. I watched as he removed his tools from a nearby cart, selecting what he needed with the ease of someone who had done this countless times before. There was something mesmerizing about watching skilled hands at work, the sureness of each movement, the complete absence of hesitation. As he worked, we talked. It started with simple questions about my car, how long I'd had it, if I'd had any other issues with it, but gradually shifted to more personal territory. I learned that he'd been working at Mike's for about 5 years, that he'd always been interested in cars ever since he was a kid helping his dad in their garage at home. He asked about my job, marketing for a small local company, my hobbies, hiking and photography, though I hadn't done much of either lately, and whether I was from the area originally. I wasn't. I'd moved here 3 years ago for the job. There was an ease to our conversation that surprised me. In the past, my interactions with mechanics had been strictly transactional. Explain the problem, get the diagnosis, pay the bill, leave. But with Alex, it felt more like getting to know someone at a party or a coffee shop, except we were surrounded by the sounds of pneumatic tools and the smell of grease. As he finished up with the heat shield, he slid out from under the car and stood up, wiping his hands on that same stained rag. "That should take care of the rattling," he said. "Let me lower it down and we can test it out." He moved to the lift controls, and I stepped back to give him space. The hydraulics hummed as my car descended slowly back to the ground. Alex was focused on the task, making sure everything was aligned properly. There was a smudge of grease on his cheek that he seemed unaware of, and for some reason, I found it endearing. Once the car was back on solid ground, he opened the driver's side door. "Let's give it a listen," he said, turning the key in the ignition. The engine came to life, and he revved it slightly. We both listened intently, and I felt a surge of satisfaction when the rattling noise was noticeably absent. "You did it," I exclaimed, genuinely pleased. It's amazing how the absence of an annoying sound can bring such relief. Alex grinned, and I noticed how it transformed his face, softening the concentrated expression he wore while working into something more boyish and carefree. "Just doing my job," he said, but I could tell he was pleased by my reaction. He shut off the engine and stepped out of the car, turning to face me. We were standing close again, perhaps closer than was strictly necessary in the spacious garage. I became acutely aware of the height difference between us, of how I had to tilt my head slightly to meet his eyes. "So," he said, his voice a little softer than before, "anything else I can help you with today?" There was something in the way he asked, a slight emphasis on the word anything, perhaps, or maybe just my imagination again, that made me wonder if he was flirting. I felt a flutter of nervousness, a good kind of nervousness, the kind that comes with possibility. "I think that's it for now," I replied, trying to match his tone. "Unless you think there's something else that needs attention?" His eyes held mine for a moment longer than necessary. "The car seems to be in good shape otherwise," he said. Then, with a slight smile, "Its owner too. Definitely flirting." I felt a blush rising to my cheeks and hoped it could be attributed to the heat of the garage. Before I could formulate a response, Alex turned to reach for a clipboard hanging on a nearby wall. "Let me just write up your invoice," he said, picking up a pen. As he wrote, I noticed a streak of oil on his forearm, stark against his skin. There was something undeniably attractive about the contrast, the evidence of hard work, of capability. He finished writing and turned back to me, clipboard in hand. As he explained the work he'd done and the cost, which was surprisingly reasonable, he gestured with his free hand. In doing so, he accidentally brushed his fingers against my face, leaving a small smudge of oil on my cheek. "Oh, sorry about that," he said, immediately noticing what he'd done. "I've got oil on my hands still." "It's okay," I said, reaching up to wipe it away. "Hazard of being in a garage, I guess." "Here, let me," he said, setting down the clipboard. He reached for a clean corner of his rag, but then seemed to think better of it. "That'll just make it worse. Hold on." He stepped closer, so close I could feel the warmth radiating from him, and raised his hand to my face. I expected him to use his thumb to wipe away the oil, but instead, he leaned in and, with a playful glint in his eye, pressed his lips gently to my cheek. The contact was brief but electric. His lips were surprisingly soft against my skin, and I felt a jolt of something shoot through me. Surprise, certainly, but also a surge of attraction that was impossible to ignore. When he pulled back, the oil smudge was gone, transferred to his own lips, which he wiped with the back of his hand. "Sorry," he said, though he didn't look sorry at all. "Couldn't resist. That's an old mechanic's trick, you know. Oil transfers better to lips than to fingers." I was fairly certain that was not, in fact, an old mechanic's trick, but I found I didn't mind the lie. "Is that so?" I managed to say, my voice steadier than I felt. "They teach you that in mechanic school?" He laughed, a warm sound that seemed to fill the space between us. "It's a closely guarded secret of the trade. Don't tell anyone I told you." The moment hung between us, charged with potential. I was acutely aware of every detail. The way the light caught in his eyes, the slight upturn at the corner of his mouth, the faint trace of oil still visible on his lower lip. Time seemed to slow, stretching out like taffy as we stood there, neither of us quite sure what to do next. It was Alex who broke the silence. "So," he said, his voice a little rougher than before, "your car's all set. But if you have any other issues, you should definitely come back. Ask for me specifically." The invitation was clear, and I found myself nodding before I'd even fully processed it. "I will," I promised, "though I hope my car behaves itself for a while." "There are other reasons to visit a garage," he pointed out, that playful glint returning to his eyes. "Oil changes, tire rotations, coffee with the mechanic who can't stop thinking about how cute you looked when you were trying to understand what a heat shield is." I laughed, partly from genuine amusement and partly from the flutter of excitement his words caused. "Is that another service you offer? Coffee with confused car owners?" "Only the special ones," he replied, and there was something in his tone that suggested he meant it. The conversation that followed had a different quality to it, lighter, more overtly flirtatious, filled with the kind of banter that comes when two people recognize a mutual attraction and decide to explore it. We exchanged phone numbers under the pretense of me being able to reach him directly if I had any more car troubles. We both knew it was more than that. As I prepared to leave, Alex walked me to my car, opening the driver's side door for me with an exaggerated flourish that made me laugh again. "Your chariot awaits," he said with a mock bow. I slid into the seat, looking up at him standing in the doorway. "Thank you for fixing the rattling," I said, "and for the unique cleaning method." He grinned, unabashed. "Anytime. Seriously, anytime." As I drove away from Mike's auto repair, I could see Alex in my rearview mirror, watching me leave. The spot on my cheek where his lips had touched still tingled slightly, as if marked by the contact. I found myself already thinking about when I might return, what minor car issue I might discover that would necessitate another visit. The whole encounter had been unexpected, a routine car repair transformed into something else entirely by a smudge of oil and a bold kiss. It reminded me that connections can happen anywhere, even in the most mundane of circumstances, that sometimes life surprises you in the best possible ways. As I drove home, the car noticeably quieter without the rattling heat shield, I found myself smiling. I had gone to the garage expecting to leave with a repaired car. Instead, I left with that, and something more, the promise of coffee, of getting to know someone who intrigued me, of exploring whatever this spark between us might become. And all because a handsome mechanic wiped oil on my cheek and cleaned it off with a kiss. The following week, I found myself driving back to Mike's auto repair. I had invented a concern about my brakes. They were making a squeaking sound, I claimed, though in reality they were functioning perfectly fine. It was a flimsy excuse, and I was pretty sure Alex would see right through it, but I didn't care. I wanted to see him again. When I pulled into the garage, I spotted him immediately. He was bent over the engine of a red pickup truck, his back to me. For a moment, I just watched him work, appreciating the confidence in his movements, the way he seemed so at home in this environment of tools and machines. Then he turned, as if sensing my presence, and his face broke into a wide smile when he saw me. Well, he called across the garage. "Look who's back. Don't tell me that heat shield is giving you trouble again." I shook my head, suddenly feeling a little foolish about my manufactured car problem. "No, it's perfect. Not a rattle to be heard. But I think there might be something wrong with my brakes. They're making this noise." Alex raised an eyebrow, clearly skeptical but playing along. "A noise, huh? Better let me take a look at that. Brake noises can be serious." He wiped his hands on a rag and walked over to me, that same confident stride I had admired before. When he reached me, he lowered his voice. "You know, you could have just called me for that coffee. You didn't need to abuse your poor innocent brakes as an excuse." I felt a blush creeping up my neck. "That obvious, huh? Let's just say I've been working on cars long enough to know when someone's making up symptoms," he replied with a wink. "But I'm flattered, and I'd still like to check your brakes, just to be thorough." He took my keys and drove my car into one of the bays. I watched as he went through the motions of a proper inspection, even though we both knew why I was really there. There was something endearing about his insistence on doing his job properly, even under these circumstances. After a few minutes, he emerged from beneath my car. "Your brakes are in perfect condition," he announced. "Not a squeak to be heard." What a mysterious problem. "How strange," I replied, trying to keep a straight face. "They were definitely making a noise earlier. Must have fixed themselves on the drive over," Alex said solemnly, though his eyes were dancing with amusement. "That happens sometimes. Cars are mysterious creatures." We stood there for a moment, the pretense hanging between us like a flimsy curtain. Then Alex glanced at his watch. "You know, I'm due for a break, and there's a coffee shop just down the street." "What a coincidence," I said. "I could use a coffee myself." And that's how I found myself walking down the street with a handsome mechanic, the sun warm on our faces, the promise of something new unfolding between us. As we walked, our hands brushed against each other, once, twice, until finally Alex took mine in his fingers intertwining with mine as if they belonged there. "You know," he said as we approached the coffee shop, "I've never had someone make up a car problem just to see me before. I'm not sure if I should be worried about your honesty or touched by your creativity." I laughed, squeezing his hand. "Let's go with touched." And maybe I was just being thorough, making absolutely sure my brakes were in good working order. "Safety first," he agreed with mock seriousness. "Very responsible of you." As we sat across from each other in that coffee shop, talking and laughing as if we'd known each other for years instead of days, I couldn't help but think about the strange path that had led us here. A rattling heat shield, a smudge of oil, a bold kiss on the cheek. Such small, seemingly insignificant things that had somehow aligned to create this moment. Life is funny that way. Sometimes the most meaningful connections come from the most mundane beginnings. Sometimes a routine trip to the mechanic turns into something else entirely. And sometimes, just sometimes, a little bit of oil on your cheek can lead to something wonderful. Total _char_count. 18,838.